You guys, all of this stuff is just so unnecessary. And I can't stress that enough. So what do we really need when we start homeschooling? I am a 10 plus year homeschool mom, and I used to teach, and I think I came into homeschooling with this idea that I had to have like all these check in the boxes, and really all I did was just spend way too much money on stuff that I did not need. And now I'm going to try to help you out, especially all of you brand new homeschool moms, because there's just so much stuff, and social media is half the problem of this, maybe even more, but I'm being generous here. Social media is half the problem of why homeschool parents think that they need like this huge list of stuff to start homeschooling. And other veteran homeschool moms, I would love if you could post down in the comments stuff that I have missed, because I know I'm not even scratching the surface of this topic. But help out the newer homeschool moms here. The stuff that you don't need. It's just this huge long list of things. So you know what this reminds me of? This reminds me of after you have your second or third child and you realize how much you overbought for that first baby. This is exactly what it feels like. So I'm going to start with the one that is the most controversial, the one that I get yelled at about the most on social media when I make this point. You do not need a teaching degree to be a homeschool parent. You don't. You absolutely do not need a teaching degree. And I know people who dislike homeschooling will scream at me over that. I do actually have a teaching degree, and I'm here to tell you, you don't need a teaching degree. That's probably the most unnecessary thing that you need for homeschooling on the entire planet. And I'll tell you why very quickly. I probably need to make a longer video about this. I know I've touched on this in some of the Generations webcasts and things like that. But here's the problem with teaching degrees, okay? Everybody assumes, until they actually do this, okay? Everybody assumes that when you go to school for education, whether it's, early elementary, middle, high school, whatever the case may be, people assume that you learn how to teach in college. That's not it. That's what your internship is for, okay? They basically throw you to the wolves in a lot of schools. And I'm not saying that every school is like that. However, my school was like that, and every other educator I've ever talked to has said the exact same thing. And homeschooling is a completely different animal than like classroom teaching. It's two totally different things. And your curriculum books are going to explain to you how to teach that curriculum. If you have a high school diploma, you are more than qualified to be a homeschool parent. The next thing I would say is the homeschool room. Actually, what I'm sitting in right now, it is completely unnecessary. You don't need it. Now, if you have the room to do it, that's great. That's cool. Use it if you want to, but you don't need to. If you need that room, you don't have to actually use it for a homeschool room. You do not need like an actual like dedicated space. Let's put it that way. You don't need a dedicated space to be a homeschooler. I know plenty of homeschool parents who teach at the kitchen table. I know plenty of homeschool parents who their kids do their schoolwork by choice, like on their beds or on the floor even if they want to. I've seen kids who actually just work better if they're not at a desk, that they work better if they're outside or if they are sometimes at the library. I have seen homeschool kids work in all kinds of situations. And this is great because you can kind of tailor the learning to the child rather than making them sit behind a desk. Maybe that child doesn't work best behind a desk. Maybe he works better when he's on the couch or when he's at the kitchen table or just in a secluded room by himself with, nobody else around. It's one of those things you really get to know your child and you kind of develop that sense about that child as you go along with the homeschooling routine. So You do not need a homeschool room, a dedicated room to homeschool your kids. And I think that that is a hang up that a lot of parents, it's a trap. It's a trap that a lot of parents fall into because they think, I don't have the space to homeschool. You don't need the space to homeschool. You don't. You need a little bit of space for books, and that's it. By the way, if you're new here, my name is Mandy. I have been homeschooling my children for the last 10 years, and I talk all kinds of homeschool topics on this channel, and I talk about a lot of books and a lot of curriculum. So if that is something that you are interested in, make sure that you hit that like button. And make sure that you subscribe to my channel so you can get all kinds of updates when I upload brand new videos. So the next one I want to say is tons of money. This is another huge misconception about homeschool parents. A lot of people think that homeschool parents are rich families. We are the opposite of rich. My husband was a career Marine, and I think most of us know that the military is not exactly known for paying a whole lot. I was a work-at-home parent. I had a little side hobby that I turned into a business, but I never pocketed any of that money. I actually used that money to pay off my student loans from getting my teaching degree because I have a degree that I never used. Now that I'm not doing that business anymore, I am just a stay-at-home mom who does this, and we still only live off of my husband's military pay. We are the opposite of rich, okay? So when I say that anybody can homeschool, anybody can homeschool. I have seen people who are extremely poor homeschool for free. There are resources out there. There's things like Ambleside Online, and people use resources at the library. There's free online resources. You can get homeschooling curriculum very cheap if you need to. They have resources out there if you just look. I would love it if all of you moms would post some really cheap or free curriculum down in the comments. I know that some people really need that type of thing. Please feel free to post what you have found down there, because I know that I don't know all of the resources, but I know many of you have used some of these things. Let me know down in the comments which is the best one. The next thing, 8 hours a day. You do not need eight hours a day. And I think that this is also a huge hang up for many parents, because many parents work and they work outside the home and they think, I don't have the time to homeschool. The great thing about homeschooling is you can do it at any time of day. Okay, so that's the first thing I want to say. You do not have to homeschool when the public school is doing school. So like your kids don't have to start at 7 and end at 3, okay? The next thing I want to tell you is that you can homeschool at night, which is really cool. People don't realize that you can do this, but you can absolutely homeschool your kids in the evenings. I know a lot of parents who work full-time jobs during the day, and then they come home and they homeschool in the evening. When your kids are older and, they're like my kids, they're high school age, they can do their own stuff at home. I am not very involved in my homeschool anymore. It's really weird, and it makes me sad sometimes, but I mean, that's just the reality of our situation. My kids work independently. I only teach one class at this point, and it's totally fine. I don't really have to worry about a whole lot. For example, today I have an appointment that is 45 minutes away. I don't have to worry about anything because my child works completely independent, and he is, an older teen. I don't have to do anything. He just does his thing while I am gone. That's how it works. So I don't have to do a whole lot of micromanaging. I don't have to do a whole lot of teaching. I just have to kind of manage a little bit. I'm not micromanaging, but I do have to kind of oversee things a little bit. So I don't need 8 hours a day. Actually, my day's kind of freed up, to be honest, and it's kind of weird. But when they're younger, you're going to spend more time with them. But as they get older and older, you're going to spend less and less time with them in your homeschooled area, and life is going to change as they get older. Also, homeschooling does not take nearly as long as public school does. So you do not need 8 hours a day. The crazy thing that I think a lot of parents don't realize is how much time is wasted in the classroom because there are like 30 to 35 kids per classroom. And that takes a lot of time. When you only have one child and you're working one-on-one, that's a concentrated amount of time with education. You don't have to spend 8 hours a day for each subject. There's a lot of time that goes into classroom management while you're teaching, especially in the younger years. And honestly, probably in the older years too. I never had the pleasure of teaching high school, but I was in high school, and a lot of time is wasted on classroom management and behavioral management issues. So you don't have that problem typically with your children. You don't have to do a lot of that. There's not a whole lot of shuffling. So many times I have parents who contact me and say, I only spent this much amount of time for this subject. Is that okay? Yes, it's okay. It's normal. And if you feel like you need to add more, you can add more. But it's totally normal not to spend 8 hours a day doing school, especially when they're younger, because it just doesn't take as long. Now, when they're older, like my kids, high school age, yes, we're spending about 4 to 6 hours depending on the day, but typically it runs into that 4 or 5 hour mark, and it's actually pretty relaxing. It's not nearly as stressful, which is great, especially in these formative years where, you know, the brain can get very overwhelmed with some of these heavier subjects that they're doing. It's just so much easier, I think, on the child and so much less stressful. The last thing I would mention is you don't need to recreate the public school atmosphere in your home. You do not need a ton of posters on the wall. You do not need all these fancy things that the public school might have. You do not need to have like those like desks. You know what I mean? Like those school desks. You do not need to have all of that stuff. If you don't have that stuff and you just have a kitchen table, that's all you need. Like, you're fine. I think sometimes we get hung up because we almost feel guilty as parents taking our kids out of public school or not sending them to public school. And we think, oh, I need to give them as much as the experience as possible. And we might not even have that thought in our head, but deep down, like that's what we're thinking, because there are these feelings of guilt and of fear. You don't need to do that. And actually, when we let go of those thoughts and those notions, that's when you really get to experience the greatness of homeschool and just how great it can be and how freeing it can be to break out of that mindset that I don't have to recreate the public school environment in my own home, because quite honestly, it's very hard to replicate unless you have been a teacher. And I kind of went overboard a little bit my first year because that was what I knew. So I bought all the posters and I got all of the things, and I turned my kitchen into a classroom. I turned like my little dining area into a full classroom. I had the whiteboard, I had the posters, I had the behavioral charts, I had everything because that's what I knew, that's what I came from. And I let go of that very early on, thankfully. But yeah, I came into homeschooling with that mindset. And I think it's harder for people like me who have taught like classroom kids and who have had classrooms, who set up classrooms, to break out of that mindset, because we have to like unlearn it. And yes, I still have a whiteboard, but you know, I actually use it, and the rest of the stuff in our homeschool area is really just my kids' stuff. Actually, that poster back there is just one that we got at the Creation Museum because it's a timeline of biblical history and it helps with our Bible studies. On the other wall is all of my son's awards for ham radio, and really this is like his ham radio setup. It's not even a school setup anymore. I have one big bookcase over here off to the side that you can't really see right now, but that's where all of our homeschool stuff is, and he uses his computer desk as his school desk. And right now he's actually at the kitchen table because I'm filming. So, you know, we school everywhere. We school in the bedroom, we school on the couch, we school at the table, we school at his computer desk. It just depends on what he's doing for the day. So once you kind of let go of that mindset, things become a little bit easier and a little bit more relaxed in your home too. So give it a try. If you are trying to replicate the public school environment, give it a try. Kind of slowly let go of things one by one and just see how you like it. All right, let me know down in the comments, like I mentioned before, let me know some of the things that you let go of, that you realize that you did not need anymore, and help out the newer homeschool moms, because at the beginning, you all know it's a little scary. So put down in the comments the stuff that you let go of to make your life a little bit easier, and those notions and those things that you had in your brain that you were like, I really don't need this. I'd love to see what your answers are. I will see you guys in the next video. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day and happy homeschooling.